The Lost Generation, 1883-1900. If you were born during this era, then our condolences. Your childhood wouldn't be filled with teddy bears or lollipops, but with artillery shells, bayonets, and mud-soaked trenches. At 17, instead of cramming for graduation exams, you'd be learning how to lie still, not coughing, not breathing too loudly, just to survive the hail of machine gun fire. Every morning, rather than choosing what to eat for breakfast, you'd be asking yourself, will I live to see tonight? Welcome to the era of survival. World War I erupted like an action movie, with no ending in sight. Main cast, all of Europe. Director, geopolitical tensions. Outcome, over 8.5 million dead, 21 million wounded, and countless more scarred for life, physically and mentally. And if you thought things will surely get better after the war, you'd be very wrong. Just a few years later came the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, killing over 50 million people, a death toll even more horrifying than the war itself. Then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, the Great Depression arrived, jobs vanished, poverty spread, and hope became a luxury item. A time when unemployment was basically a national sport, and a proper meal felt like a fairy tale. You'd learn to cook soup from water and leaves, and the phrase, "I ate today," became a rare joy. Why are they called the Lost Generation? Not because they lost their way, but because they lost too much. Lost their youth, lost their peace, lost the very idea of a beautiful, carefree young adulthood. They didn't watch the world collapse on TV. They lived it, with their own bodies, every single day. Yet even in the ruins, brilliance emerged. Albert Einstein, yes, that one. While the world ducked for cover, he was busy figuring out how the universe bends if you fall into a black hole, even though most people back then were just falling into breadline queues. Alexander Fleming, while millions were dying from infection, he forgot to clean his lab and accidentally discovered penicillin, a miracle that saved millions of lives, and gave you a solid excuse for not tidying your room. Hey, I might be on the verge of greatness. In short, if you belong to this generation, you grew up while bombs were falling, survived a global pandemic with no medicine, no vaccines, only hope, lived on watery porridge like a broke monk, not because you wanted to, but because you had no choice. Yet you also witnessed and contributed to some of the greatest turning points in human history. The Greatest Generation, 1901 to 1927. If you were born between 1901 and 1927, then congratulations. You are part of the group history remembers as the Greatest Generation. But don't let the name fool you. That title wasn't handed out freely, and it was earned through war, sacrifice, sweat, and an unshakable will. A childhood in the shadows, you were born into a world still bleeding from the wounds of World War I. And just as the gunfire faded, the Great Depression struck like lightning on a clear day. No toys, no TV, no phones. Your earliest lessons didn't come from books, but from hardship. How to divide a loaf of bread to last the week. How to smile even when your shoes were falling apart. And how to keep the fire of family burning when the world around you was reduced to ashes. Your hero wasn't a movie star. It was your parents, those who carried the weight of the family with nothing but grit and love. And as you grew up, war found you again. Just as you stepped into adulthood, the world went up in flames once more. World War II wasn't just a headline, it became your daily reality. One day you were frying potatoes. The next you were storming the beaches of Normandy. You flew fighter planes, cracked enemy codes, drove tanks through hell, and built weapons in factories while rationing sugar at home. You weren't just a soldier. You were a nurse, an engineer, a builder, and a bearer of hope. Rebuilding the world from the ashes. When the war ended, you didn't come home to rest. You rolled up your sleeves and started over, from zero. You built schools, homes, and hospitals. You created new economies, new laws, new dreams. You didn't just rebuild the world, you reshaped the future. You were the bridge between destruction and progress, between dark days and the hope of a brighter tomorrow. Why are they called the Greatest Generation? Not because they were better than anyone else, but because they fought without seeking glory, sacrificed without asking for gain, and gave all they had for what was right. They didn't complain, they didn't post their pain online. They just quietly worked, endured, and handed us a world still standing. In summary, if you belong to this generation, you endured poverty with dignity, fought tyranny with courage, rebuilt society with vision and faith. You were called the greatest, not because of the dreams you once had, but because of the things you actually did. The Silent Generation, 1928-1945. If you were born during this era, then your life began in silence. No fireworks, no festive parades, only economic collapse, a world war, and waves of migration. You were a child born between two global disasters. Born just as World War II ignited. Came of age as the Cold War began. And by the time you were ready to work, society told you sit still, don't cause trouble, know your place. An era of crisis. From the moment you entered the world, you could hear the groaning of a collapsing economy. The Great Depression of 1929 left tens of millions jobless. Thousands of banks failed. Breakfast became a luxury. Children went hungry. wore patched up clothes, and quickly learned to stay quiet so the adults wouldn't worry more. Silence to survive, not a philosophy, but a survival instinct. A World in Flames. World War II, 1939 to 1945. When you were only 10 to 15 years old, the world once again plunged into chaos. Hitler invaded Europe. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The war broke out on every front. And you, though still a teenager, could be drafted. You learned how to duck bombs, find shelter, and recognize air raid sirens. Your adolescence passed in the shadow of ration stamps, coal stoves, and casualty reports. But don't mistake silence for weakness. From your generation emerged giants. Martin Luther King Jr., who gave voice to a silenced people. Gloria Steinem, who sparked the modern women's movement. Bob Dylan, Aretha Franklin, James Baldwin, voices, pens, and minds that reshaped American culture and consciousness. You laid the groundwork for revolutions, even if you weren't the ones holding up the banners. The personality of the silent generation. Reserved and principled. Believers in order and authority. Less complaining, more doing. Family and responsibility above all. Work was not just duty, it was meaning. Not dreamers, but resilient. Not loud, but deeply dependable. They endured humanity's coldest chapter. After WIF II came the Cold War, nuclear tension, the collapse of ideologies, the Korean War, the Vietnam War lurking on the horizon, and still, silently, they stood at the front lines, soldiers, nurses, weapons engineers, space scientists, and yet, no one posted a status about it. The baby boomer generation, 1946 to 1964, the generation of explosive growth. If you were born between 1946 and 1964, you are part of the baby boomers, the generation born in the joy of post-war victory and raised amid the explosion of a brand new world, one of the largest, loudest, and most influential generations of the 20th century. The result? A population boom like never before. Over 76 million children were born in less than 20 years. You grew up in an era where everything was expanding, when the population skyrocketed. Suburbs popped up like mushrooms. Cars, refrigerators, and televisions for the first time entered every home. And when you reached adulthood, you witnessed the anti-war movement, the hippie era, the sexual revolution, and of course, the Beatles. You got jobs, bought homes, and raised families. Back when a house cost less than a motorbike, and minimum wage could support a household. You were the first generation where hard work could truly buy the dream. But the world wasn't all sunshine. Boomers also lived through major conflicts and upheavals. The Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, the Cold War arms race, the oil crisis, and growing questions about faith, freedom, and government. You were raised in order, but came of age in rebellion. The first generation raised by a screen as boomers were the first to see the world through television. A president assassinated, broadcast live, a man stepping on the moon, watched in awe around the globe. Rock music, color films, personal computers, all arrived within your lifetime. You didn't just live in a time of change, you were at the center of it. Why are they called baby boomers? After World War II, the world entered a historic phase of reproductive explosion. In just 2 decades, the global population swelled by hundreds of millions. You were the product of renewed belief in a brighter future, a symbol of hope, rebirth, and the world's return to strength. In summary, if you're a baby boomer, you were born into peace and raised with opportunity, witnessed humanity's transformation from radio to the internet, were both the beneficiaries and the builders of the modern world. Generation X, the forgotten rebels. Generation X, the name no one really talks about, but honestly, it deserves way more respect. Born between 2 loud generations, the baby boomers and the millennials, Gen X is like the middle child of modern history. Not quite Woodstock, not quite TikTok. You grew up with MTV, cassette tapes, and Saturday morning cartoons. The internet? That was mythical, until dial-up came and ruined every family phone call ever. You were the original figure-it-out-yourself generation. Came home alone after school, microwaved dinner, and watched budget sitcoms like it was fine dining. You survived rotary phones, floppy disks, and the nightmare of rewinding VHS tapes by hand. You were the first to use email. Now you get spammed daily by your kid's school. Gen X is skeptical, independent, and allergic to nonsense. You saw your parents grind 9 to 5 and still be miserable. So you thought, nah, I want to actually live. You were punk before it was trendy, sarcastic before the internet discovered irony. New trends? You just raise an eyebrow. NFTs? Ridiculous. AI? Overhyped. Avocado toast? Please. But here's the thing. While other generations chase clout and go viral, Gen X is quietly keeping the world running, managing businesses, raising Gen Z, and making sure everything doesn't fall apart. You are the bridge between analog and digital. Millennials, Generation Y, also known as the digital natives. Millennials are the generation that grew up alongside the rise of the internet, smartphones, and social media. If you're part of this crew, congrats. You're a master of adaptation. You've heard the screech of dial-up modems, flipped open a clamshell phone, and now live in a world of lightning-fast touchscreens. You once dreamed of flying cars, and maybe you're still waiting. Millennials are the Swiss Army knife of generations. Flexible, resourceful, and always ready to embrace the new. They're also a generation that studied hard, often pushed by parents to pursue higher education. Unfortunately, when they graduated, the job market wasn't so welcoming. They entered adulthood just as the economy was wobbling, burdened with student debt big enough to scare a small country. Millennials often get blamed for killing the housing market, but really, they're just bearing the outdated idea that success means owning a house. They prefer collecting experiences over possessions, which explains why their Instagrams are filled with travel photos instead of freshly mowed lawns. In terms of tech, they're the just right generation, not too old to be out of touch, but not too young to be fully dependent on AI. They can teach their parents how to use Facebook, while still needing their younger siblings to explain Snapchat filters. In short, millennials are a generation of transformation, from analog to digital, from steady jobs to the gig economy, from traditional living to open-minded thinking. Gen Z, the generation raised on Wi-Fi and emojis. Imagine a generation where babies were swiping screens before they could even talk, rocking in a crib with full Wi-Fi bars. That's Gen Z, the original tech wizards. They don't just use social media, they've built an entire meme universe. If you're Gen Z, chances are you can type emojis faster than actual words. Sometimes a simple crying face or frog coffee says more than a whole paragraph. Try handing them a rotary phone or a flip phone. They'll look at you like you just pulled out an alien artifact. To them, the world has always been touchscreen, always on, always online. Google, not just a tool, it's a pocket professor on call 24/7. For Gen Z, research means scrolling through Instagram, and a library is wherever there's free Wi-Fi and air conditioning. Social media isn't just a tool, it's part of life itself. TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and even that new app no one else remembers. They know them all. They live and breathe algorithms. But don't assume Gen Z is just about screen time. They care deeply about the world, from climate change and social justice to mental health and animal rights. They're master multitaskers, efficiency-driven, and wildly creative. Gen Alpha, the tap-and-go generation. For Gen Alpha, technology isn't just a tool, it's instinct. Still trying to figure out how to turn off app notifications? These kids were probably issuing voice commands in the womb. They don't learn how to use an iPad. They adapt to it the moment they open their eyes. While older generations are still going, "Where's the button?" These kids are already like, "Hey Siri, play my study playlist." Their toys don't go beep beep anymore. They respond with AI, speak 3 languages, and update themselves overnight. In school? Fully virtual. You're in class. They're on Mars. Gen Alpha communicates with swipes and taps. One swipe, weather report. One command, enter a digital universe. Think locking your fridge with a password is enough? Think again. These kids crack pins like mini hackers. The world they'll grow up in? Picture this. Morning traffic, but in the sky with delivery drones and personal flying cars. Down below, robots walking dogs and vending lattes. Oh, and pet translators. Totally possible. One day you'll find out your cat actually hates you, and has for years. And one day, they'll live on Mars. Some Gen Alpha kids will be born on the red planet. To them, Earth's oceans and skies will seem like a strange vacation spot. Long-distance relationships? Not across cities or countries, across planets. And they'll look back at us, typing on physical keyboards, manually charging phones, steering cars with our hands, the same way we look at cassette tapes and dial-up modems. Clunky, ancient, but kind of cute.